Do you, talking about getting the economy back on track, what do you think is the timeline for getting us stabilized, getting us back to where we were, or whatever the proper term is? Whatever's marked as a victory at this point of getting the economy back.
I don't know if anybody can offer a specific timeline. This is a recession that's been worldwide. In the United States, it's been the deepest, longest recession since World War II. It could become the longest recession since the Great Depression. And it's hard, even for the best economists, to predict when we might come out of it. I am glad to see some positive signs, indications that home sales have been up for the last 3 months in a row, that car sales are moving upward, that the financial system seems to no longer be on the edge of what President Bush once told me last fall was potential for cataclysmic failure. And so it's good for a change to see some positive signs out there, but I think it's still too early to predict success. And unfortunately, the unemployment figures always follow the recession, and when we start coming out of recession, the last thing companies will do is hire people back because they want to be sure that we're truly out of the recession. But at least the fact that the stock market, the S&P 500, is up by, I believe, over 40% since the 9th of March is certainly enormously important for people whose life savings, their children's college education funds depended on that stock market investment.
Well, it's kind of funny that you brought up the unemployment numbers, because we heard, with the stimulus package, we heard that, there's going to be a probable limit to what that would go up to, and then when the numbers have now come out, now we're a point or two beyond that. So it was, I think it was 8.5 or 9% that they said it would go up to, and now we're at 11 or 11.1 or somewhere right in there. How do we judge what's going to happen when we think it's only going to go to say 9, and yet all of a sudden we're 2 points higher than that? How do we?
Right. Well, thank you. Okay, so we'll share this with you. If as has happened, the recession turned out to be deeper and more serious than even best economists predicted, I think that's an argument not that we should have had no stimulus. It's an argument that the economy was even worse off than we thought. The problem was I think stated very well by President Bush in my last trip with him on Air Force One last year, when he said, if we prevent cataclysmic failure of the economy, if we prevent a second Great Depression from occurring, just understand no one will get credit for that. And there are a lot of experts that say we could have seen a second Great Depression, that the capital markets were literally frozen in ways that they hadn't seen since the Depression. So it's hard to judge the success or failure of a program by a set unemployment rate on a set date. I think one of the keys is that we need to keep pushing to get the stimulus money out as quickly as possible. And I can tell you this, that state legislators in Austin told me, had it not been for the $14.2 billion stimulus money that the Texas legislature received, there would have been massive layoffs, and teachers and teacher pay raises would not have happened, and you could have had layoffs in law enforcement and transportation as well. And here in Johnson County, the Chisholm Trail project is being moved forward because of stimulus money, $143 million, which will be put into both the Highway 67, 174 exchange, and then the Fort Worth exchange, that are critical to moving 121 forward. So to me, that's the way the stimulus money should have been used.
Do you think it was the right amount, not enough, too much?
It's hard to say, but while more stimulus would have had a more immediate impact on the economy, I think we do be sensitive to the deficit situation. But by the way, the best way to reduce the deficit in the short run is to get us out of the recession.
Okay.
Recessions in and of themselves create massive deficits because you have more people unemployed accepting taxpayers' benefits and fewer people working, paying taxes on their income.
So it doesn't really work like it would at home, because if you were in a deficit at home, you'd say, okay, we're not going out to eat, we're gonna stop spending. So that doesn't necessarily translate to the government.
It is different. In the long run, I think the principle that applies to businesses and families must apply to government. You can't forever spend your life on credit card charges greater than the income you're making. My view about the stimulus was that in the short run, since 70% of the economy was based on consumption in our country, and since consumption was down dramatically, the only entity big enough to try to make up for that loss and to help jumpstart the car battery to the engine being the private enterprise system, was the government. But I thought it was critical the stimulus money be written in such a way it provided short-term stimulus without a long-term recurring fiscal cost. So for example, the road projects, the tax cuts were one-time funding mechanisms. The funding the state of Texas to prevent massive layoffs of teachers was one-time funding. It didn't lock us into structural duplication of those expenditures in the years out. I think it's vitally important, once we get out of this recession, we get back on a glide path toward a balanced budget. And in the pay-as-you-go bill that recently passed in the House, I added the provision that made this permanent, that if you want to cut taxes or spend more money on entitlement programs, you have to pay for that. No more free lunches. And I hope that's a part of getting us back on a glide path toward a
I'm
balanced
gonna
budget.
actually let one of these other guys jump in here in a minute, but I'm
Sure.
gonna stay on that path for just a second.
Okay,
With the teachers,
yes.
obviously school districts everywhere are hurting. And with the money coming from the state of Texas, part of that money that they got this time around, which is only for a couple of years, says that they must give raises to this group but not that group, and so on and so forth. So where some of that money could easily have kept some of those teachers on, they're still having trouble because the school districts are having trouble. And I know that's not really anything you deal with in Washington, because it's a
Right.
state level legislature thing.
Right.
But is that something that can be helped from the federal level?
One of the things I worked hard on was to see that the Secretary of Education approved the Texas plan for the funding, even though I think we could have spent the money more effectively in education. And the real intent of that $3 billion in funding for education for Texas was that the state add to the present level of state funding for education, to make the kind of investments to improve our schools, whether that's construction or immediate pay raises or other things. Instead, what the legislature did is they cut the state funding for pay raises in our public schools and then used the federal money to replace that money. I wish it had been done differently, but nevertheless, I respect the legislature as the voice of our Texas government. And once they made their budget decision, I think it would have created a nightmare to have the Secretary of Education disapprove of Texas's use of the education money. They would have had to go back into a special session, not during the ball game. It would have been changing the rules after the ball game was already over, and that would have created great uncertainty in our schools. So I did work in that way to try to ease the problems.
Now, what committees do you serve on?
I am on the Budget Committee and on the Appropriations Committee. I'm one of only a handful of members of Congress that serves on both of those committees. On Appropriations, I'm on 3 subcommittees. I chair the Veterans Administration and Military Construction Appropriations Subcommittee. I'm Vice Chairman on the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, and then I'm a member of the Financial Services Subcommittee.